subgroup, and then finish up with the unserved, underserved, and funding. Then we'll leave a few minutes at the end to just talk about where the subgroups are overall after we've had the discussion, talk a little about the draft report we're putting together, and then we'll end with the public comments or any other business anyone else on the task force or others that are participating on the call want to be able to bring up. So any questions or comments on the agenda? All right. So next we'll go to the approval of the minutes. Diane sent this out, I believe, last week. Hopefully all of you have had a chance to look at the minutes from our previous meeting. Any questions or comments or things we need to be changing on the minutes before they get officially published? Okay, I'll take the silence as approval. So the minutes have been approved and we'll be good to go to be able to post those. All right, switching to the next update. It's just, as usual, our update from the Office of Broadband Development. I don't know if it's Angie or Diane. We'll give a quick update on the latest what's been happening with OBD.
Thanks, Teddy. It'll be Diane. Just a couple of things. I think Ann Tracy had blogged about it, but the office has 2 positions open right now. We're hiring a broadband grants administrator and a broadband program assistant. So if you have any candidates in mind, please let them know. The window for applying does close on Friday, November 4th. These are telework positions, so you can work from home. There may be some meetings in St. Paul that you would need to travel to attend. Those would be pretty sporadic and infrequent, I guess I would say. And they're permanent positions. I don't know if I said that. Versus if we are able to hire down the road when we see some of the additional funding that's supposed to be coming, those might be more temporary, but these would be permanent positions. And then the second thing is on the Capital Projects Fund. The office continues to work closely with the governor's office on getting the application in. We are also waiting on Treasury. They have not put out a grant program template. We have heard them on a few webinars saying it'll be available in the next couple of weeks, and it still is not out yet. So they're probably working through a number of things. We also have not seen the FAQs posted yet. I know we submitted a number of questions the day after Treasury issued guidance. We did get an email back with responses to that. We also did send a subsequent question regarding whether or not capital projects funding can be used in RDOF areas. We have not gotten an email response from them, and we have not seen their FAQs posted yet. So we're waiting on those couple of things. And then lastly, I'll just mention the Reconnect program. That is the USDA program for very rural areas. That application window opened last week. So that's another opportunity that folks can apply to for assistance. And I did see Devin is on. I'm not reading or hearing anything on an update on a special session, and we're getting closer and closer to the start of the 2022 session. If he has any information, he can jump in. Otherwise, I don't think there's anything set or on the horizon. So that's all. Unless Angie wants to jump in with anything, I see she's on. Oh, okay.
Devin? Yeah, go ahead, Devin.
Yeah, I mean, Diane's right. No new news on a special session. I think the politics of it all kind of overwhelms everything.
Okay. Thank you, Devin. Any questions for Diane, Angie, or Devin on OBD? Again, you can use the raise the hand feature or come off mute. All right. Thank you, Diane, for that update. Move on to the next topic. So, Banya, you're the Executive Director for Lead of America. So again, welcome and thank you for being able to make time to present at this task force meeting, and would love to hear your overview on the regional gatherings. So
Awesome. Thanks so much, Teddy, and thanks everyone for welcoming me in today. I'm going to share my screen. My hope is to share an update on what the regional gatherings were for the Blandin conference. So this was a little twist this year. As you may know, Blandin every year does an annual broadband conference. I was glad to be invited in to be part of the steering committee for the conferences this year. And one thing that we did a little different was to lead up to this big virtual conference, which is with a series of regional gatherings. I'll explain a little bit about who I am and what my role with Lead for America and how some of this data was collected. And then we'll just go through and share, we asked each regional gathering to say, what were your biggest needs or opportunities at this moment presented to your communities and to your regions? And then also, what would it take to help you get to the finish line or help you leverage and maximize those opportunities? So I'll share an overview of what the themes that we heard all across our regions were and get into a little discussion too of sharing, what were things that are really necessary to be locally driven, as well as places where this task force, where the governor's office, where OBD can be a helpful player. So sharing of screen here, and we'll start here. Can everyone see this okay? Great.
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Great. So yeah, here's you'll see some familiar logos here. These regional gathering data is collected by Lead for Minnesota's American Connection Corps Fellows. So if you're unfamiliar with Lead for Minnesota or Lead for America, Lead for Minnesota, we are a state affiliate of a national organization, Lead for America. So I'm one of the co-founders of our national org, as well as, thanks to the Bush Foundation, was able to bring our national organization and headquarter it here in my family's hometown of Waseca, Minnesota, but we do serve and work statewide. Our mission essentially is to ensure that the next generation of diverse, dynamic leaders are working on their community's toughest challenges, especially in places where the narrative of success might mean leaving and not coming back. So to that end, we are a Serve Minnesota program, which means we receive and distribute AmeriCorps funds and support a 2-year paid fellowship program that brings recent college grads back to their hometowns, home regions, or sometimes broadly home states to tackle what their communities say are their toughest problems. I know on this call we have a few hosts actually on here. So Jason has been hosting one of our fellows up in Fond du Lac. But this past year, we partnered with Land O'Lakes and their American Connection project. So a coalition, I'm sure at this point everyone's familiar, that's advocating for $80 billion of broadband investment at the federal level over the next 5 years. So some of these logos you'll see here, the American Connection project helped us launch the American Connection Corps. We have 50 fellows over 16 states that are using our fellowship model as a way to bring extra capacity and talent and local championing for broadband efforts. So some of these logos here are the companies that are also partners in this initiative. And these 6 American Connection Corps fellows are the 6 serving across Minnesota. Again, Minnesota is one of the 16 states that are part of this pilot project. They were enlisted, you could say, to help us gather what were the common themes and ideas at each of these regional gatherings. So we met together and were able to synthesize what was spoken about at each of the regional gatherings, and we shared this at the annual Broadband conference, got a little bit more feedback on how these themes were resonating across the whole state, and this is what I'm here today to give an update on. So with that, we asked this question of what can we seize now? So what are our greatest opportunities for our region? The 4 kind of synthesized main themes here were provider collaboration and coordination, pursuing public partnership with providers to increase transparency and access, developing a coordinated communication strategy, and looking at digital literacy investment. So these were seen as the 4 biggest areas. I'm going to go through, just some subpoints about how these themes were brought about, and what were some examples of what does it mean, to say we're strengthening the collaboration and coordination. So the first here is bringing trusted providers together to work and divide up areas that they are interested in. This requires also local coordination between townships, cities, counties that are actually approaching ISPs together, and ensuring that local steering committee members have ISP representatives from the start. So this is, kind of three themes that locally were found as the best practice approaches of how to make sure that ISPs and community leaders are working together right from the start. The second piece is thinking of this public partnership around transparency and access. So across all the regional gatherings, there were multiple great examples of a broad continuum of what public partnership looks like. So this theme here is really trying to say, let's explore what works best for your own place. And that public partnership doesn't necessarily always mean municipal-owned networks. It can also just be a private ISP, but that there's very strong and intentional provider-community relations. So we had a few providers that talked about what the work that they were doing to make sure that their consumers and their customer base knew who they were and what they were doing. We also heard, especially from county EDAs, saying that you got to understand the short and long-term economic forecast for telecom and cooperatives, and then proactively plan with them. So a lot of the successful themes were saying, okay, what are the challenges and what would it take to be able to have you build out in this area, and let's figure out that solution. This piece here around developing a mechanism for public leverage to ensure provider maps are accurate and encourage use of citizen-based speed maps. So this is intentionally vague in the sense that the mechanism I think is up for further study and recommendations on what that mechanism could look like, but I think there was very broad-based support for saying we got to make sure that as any provider is building out, that the speeds are actually accurate and that there's a way of checking in on that and making sure that that is updated. So that could look like mainstreaming more citizen-based speed maps, or having a part in a grant application to make sure that the maps being provided are indeed accurate. And then lastly here around getting creative with your natural assets. So we explored across the state how grain elevators, even in some cases white pine trees, and school buses too can offer fixed wireless and hotspot services. The Land O'Lakes team gave a great presentation to our fellows about how they were repurposing some of their local co-op grain elevators to help offset the cost for providers by being able to dedicate their own co-op grain elevators as that very high vertical structure that you could put a fixed device on. So those are a few examples. I'm highlighting here, and you'll see this throughout the presentation, places that this is a blend of what can you do locally and what could be needed at the state level for support. And so I'll just be circling some of those key themes of ways that this task force and the Office of Broadband Development can engage. Thirdly, this coordinated communication strategy. So this was exciting. I think people got very creative over what this could look like and what were similar, effective strategies for communicating to a broad-based public of saying broadband is an essential service that we need to, make sure our commissioners are supporting, that locally we are able to see if we have broadband, here's what we can do with it. And so trying to look at what does a statewide PR campaign look like? How can we learn from veterans, billboard strategies, and things like that that help increase the public awareness around the necessity of this. So what was cool was saying that each region was wanting to be in conversation with each other. So you could be driving down any major highway in Minnesota and know that broadband is at the front of mind. This also includes getting real grassroots. We heard from a lot of great examples of using county fairs as a big place to increase grassroots public awareness around what is happening in your region around broadband, what you can expect in the coming 1 to 3 to 5 years around your access, and making sure that we're tapping into township associations and working at the city level to get that out. And then lastly, also participating in networks, like this Blandin network, like the Rural Broadband Coalition Network, to make sure that you're not feeling alone and that all these best strategies can actually be shared. So I'm circling here that coordinated statewide PR campaign around the opportunity here of making sure we have some coordinated points and are also rallying local people see the importance of this. Lastly, digital literacy investment. So another key opportunity that I think particularly the pandemic highlighted, it's not just about getting broadband, it's also having people know what they can do with it. So there were a few examples across the state or of regions that were providing one-on-one digital literacy clinics. Libraries were a huge institution that were doing this, and tapping into community ed to deliver that support. Here, I'm going to be highlighting this federal funds and private partnerships to provide devices to those without access. I know Scott's on the line, so we'll probably be talking about the Connected MN work that has been happening all across the state, but being able to see that, that's a huge need as well, and I think an area of further statewide coordinated support to be able to think creatively of how this injection of federal funds can also be looking at the digital literacy and equity component. All right, so now what do we need to get there? These were recommendations that arose across the regions of what we heard of what would be helpful in making sure we could get to meet those key opportunities in those 4 themes I just described. So the first kind of totally resonating across every region was about the need to cultivate local champions. So this includes just the technical capacity to organize local stakeholders and engage community. You'll see here that I said more Barbs and more Kips. These are real people who were the individual catalysts that, were the ones setting up booths at the county fair, were the ones convening local ISPs together with local electeds to say, okay, how do we get this to be the top of mind in our county? How do we have one-on-one conversations with county commissioners that might be hesitant out of principle to be using ARP funds to provide that local match for investment? So what is the local organizing or local just championing and attentiveness to this issue that can be cultivated? So, obviously a lot of my entry into this work has been around the American Connection Corps. We wanted to pilot this program at a pilot level across these 16 states, start small and show that the impact that it can have, but are also looking at growing this program in the upcoming years, and also seeking both public and private support to have it be long lasting. I think this is an opportunity that national service can play here of helping to cultivate and sustain these local champions, but beyond just the American Connection Corps, what are other opportunities that we can build this network and build the capacity and skill building of these people that are advocating for this locally? This also includes preparing them with facilitation and planning support. So the Blandin Foundation is an excellent example of that, bringing together their Blandin broadband communities to share those best practices and keep the morale and I think rallying power strong. So this is one of those, how can we move that needle forward on cultivating local champions? And circling here as well that I think there's also really great opportunity for this group in the broadband office to plug into. Next, frequent and digestible funding updates. So I say digestible because that was also a key theme that we heard of trying to understand and see clarity on how federal and state funding opportunities can complement one another. And making that clear and getting that distributed here to the second point of activating different local associations that can disseminate that information. The third piece here was also looking at expanding government funding streams, particularly at the state level, and also expanding the Minnesota Rural Broadband Coalition membership. Across the board, we heard of how can we stay up to date on what are the funding opportunities and also create a way of making sure rural voices are heard in that process. So circling these two in particular is, I think, places at a state level that can support. Thirdly, this cross-county coordination on projects. Developing regional maps were a key thing that we heard. There was a lot of just questions of how do we know what places are being served and what are projects also underway. So not just looking at it as a yes, no, are you served or not, but also trying to understand what is in the pipeline, where might we be able to build coalitions of ISPs together with local electeds so we can understand what are the priority of projects. This also includes building this cross-county consortium, especially for fiber line development, to be able to apply jointly for those opportunities. And then on the mapping component, working across those county lines as well to be counting those households. Circling here, again, this just, I think, central coordinating, here's the clarity, here's what's happening from, what we can share and what we know. And then lastly here, this adaptive funding mechanism. So these were some specific things that we heard across different regions. This first one is about waiving a 50% match requirement for providers that are working on projects in geographically challenging regions. This kind of component of if you are in a geographically diverse place, how can the grant programs also be responsive to that adaptation or those specific challenges? A big thing we also heard was the supply chain challenges for fiber construction materials. So how can we think of ways to solve staggered grant funds or overcome that supply chain challenge? And then thirdly, this was a big one of questions across the state. We're saying, can we use our local ARPA funds? Is there a way to advocate for that as federal grant opportunities are being compiled? So on this, I've circled all three of these as places that I think across our regions, people and local leaders are looking to this kind of statewide office to help figure out. So lastly, here is just the summary of what we heard of where we're going in terms of where our regions are seeing the greatest opportunities to move the needle forward on broadband, and then how we'll get there with programs or communication or effort that can be coordinated across the state as well as locally of how we can make sure that we can seize these opportunities right here on the left-hand side. So with that, I will pause. I know that was a lot of me speaking, so looking forward to answering any questions as well. So let me stop sharing.
Okay, if we have any questions for Benya on the overview, please raise the hand feature or come off mute. Either is okay. Ask the question or make a comment. Steve Georgie has a hand up. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay. Yeah, I'm curious. The mention of expanding the government funding at state level. I'm wondering if there was more detail about that. Are we talking just about the grant allocation for border to border, or are we suggesting that the state needs to designate different fund sources? Or could you expand on that?
Yeah. So I'll say that I don't think there was any consensus across the regions of what exactly that looks like. I think the consensus approach was saying that we do need more funds allocated both into border to border. I know in some regions people kind of talked about, are there ways of having legislation also passed that is looking at broadband as an infrastructure spending, and so opening up some of those pathways as well for additional funding. But I want to be clear that there's not necessarily one consensus coalition voice of where that money should be going, but I think just appetite for understanding that a lot of local projects require more funding support.
Other questions or comments?
Benny, I'm curious whether there were any examples of really well experienced, good working coalitions that had already been formed that came up as examples that people might lean on or look to for guidance? Yeah, you'll see in one of the slides I said more barbs, exclamation point, and that's a nod at a local leader here in Leesore County, and Barb, it was someone her and Carl Menk, he's this technology officer in the school district,
created a broad-based local steering committee coalition that from the get-go started bringing different providers together and actually started, taking a map and breaking down who had plans or projects in different areas across the county, and together said, okay, here's where we've divvied up, here's where we need extra investment, and then we're also able to get broadband as a core strategy and priority for the county commissioners too. So I know they've been held up a little bit with some of the LTD funding challenges and things like that, of where grants got awarded, but in terms of really being able to locally coordinate where they needed to be, who are all the players, and again, like also showing up at county fairs to have it be something that local people wanted and were advocating to their commissioners, I think was a really great success of that. I know that there's also some other Blandon folks on here too, and Tracy, who is soaking in always these best practices or best coalitions, and I've been really impressed too with Jason's work up at Fond du Lac of work that they've been doing for several years to build up their own provider network as well. So if anyone else wants to chime in on that, feel free.
Brian Cranbeer has a question or comment.
Thanks, Teddy. I just wanted to say thanks. I think there's a lot of really good information here. It covers a pretty broad area that I think the committee is well aware of, is funding and the importance of getting it out there. So it just reinforces our work. So thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Yvonne Caraveau.
Hey, Benya. One of the things I wanted to ask about was the matchmaking process a little bit. One of the things we heard about in the Broadband conference was about that people power piece of things, especially for smaller communities, communities that are struggling with even having a staff person to look at broadband and to, work on these efforts. With the 6 that you have, in the state, now you have a little bit of traction on that. Is there any way that we can help as a task force, anything we can do to help you in putting more fellows out in these communities?
Yeah, thanks, Yvonne. I mean, what was very cool about the American Connection Project is that it was a group of private partners here, in Minnesota, Land O'Lakes, Mayo, Schooler, Centric Care, Midwest Dairy, that came together and said, okay, we wanted to show that this can work, and so let's mobilize funding really quickly to support, these 50 fellows across 16 states. I'm proud to say that the highest number of fellows in any state is here in Minnesota. So I think definitely poised for scale. We've already been getting a lot of communities saying we want to host one for next year, and are figuring out what is the right funding stream. Because I think that the great part of private capital is that you can do it quickly and show that something can work. But for it to be long lasting, we are seeking partnership with public partners, of thinking of how can we sustain this program. I mentioned too that we're a Serve Minnesota grantee, so have really loved working with our State Service Commission. It's also one of the best state service commissions in the country as well, and so I think they are a great model of how they can use our organization as a rural intermediary to make sure that national service is indeed national, and that we can get AmeriCorps dollars and match it also with a local match or a state match as well, to make sure that we can get fellows in some of the hardest to reach often places for national service. So that's what I would say. Yeah, we're actively seeking partnerships on how to expand the number of places we have, even as soon as this upcoming August is when we launch our next cohort.
Steve, I believe you have a follow-up. No? Okay. Teresa?
Yeah, thanks, Benya. I just have a comment. It's not a question about the citizen-based speed maps. There's a lot of variables around those, and whether it be the age of the device, the computer, the wiring in the home, the distance. So they, yes, can be a good tool, but I don't know how it would tie into the broadband program here, the one that we're using with OBD. So I'm just saying there's variables with that, but thank you.
Teresa. Other questions or comments from the task force?
Benya, regarding the private side investment, is there still a fairly robust appetite for continuing to support the program from the private sector at this point?
I think all of our private partners are excited to be, strong advocates of making sure that it's sustainable moving forward as well, and that we can, kind of build that momentum further and not have it be a one-time kind of project, but thinking of how can we, build that over time as well and make sure that we can increase the communities we're in. So that's what I can offer on that point. But each of their teams, in terms of also their GR, their government relations support and things like that, have been really helpful in saying how can we champion this as a cause that we can all agree on and is important.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands up. All right, nobody else coming off mute. Okay, well, Benya, thank you so much for taking the time and being here with us. Really appreciate you making the effort and some great information shared and doing some really good work for the state. So we truly appreciate your efforts and the rest of it.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, everyone.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. All right, let's do this. Since we have some extra time, a little bit now, let's take a break, about an 8-minute break. It's 10:37, and then let's get back together at 10:45, and then we'll start with the first subgroup discussion on mapping and speed goals.